I worked once for someone who scared the life out of me. I couldn't chew gum and walk at the same time. I was so afraid of making a mistake. That's not a leadership brand. That's a mistake. That's someone who shouldn't be in management, right? But I also know that when you call out people, either not just for showing up, but for extraordinary achievement or for extraordinary effort, man, they thrive. They love it. It's give it freely. This is a gift to give away. Too many managers have taught themselves not to do that. But again, it's that combination of real-time constructive feedback plus recognition. To me, that's the right answer. This is the better answer, because the truth of the matter is great leadership is about two things. It's about character and it's about caring. That's it. The character, the trust, the respect, the culture that you build in your ecosystem. That's the character of the person you work for. The fact that that person cared about me personally tells me that management is a heart issue.
You're listening to Lead with Dr. Ralph Hughes, leadership thought leader, author, and keynote speaker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another insightful episode. This podcast is dedicated to bringing issues to light that hinder people in leadership positions and offers best practices from organizational leaders who got it right and industry experts who can share their perspectives. Today, we talk about causal issues relative to communication breakdown between leaders and followers and how to correct the communication deficit between them. Guiding us through this discussion and providing invaluable insight, I am honored to introduce our esteemed guest. Our expert guest is Principal of Workplace Leadership Consulting, specializing in management and leadership training, executive coaching, international keynote speaking, and human resources advisory services. He is the former Chief Human Resources Officer of Nickelodeon. Yes, you probably heard of that show. And has held senior level HR positions with Paramount Pictures, Time Warner, and City of Hope. He has extensive experience in entertainment, healthcare biotech, and financial services, including international nonprofit and union environments. He is the author of a number of best-selling HarperCollins Leadership, Amacom, and Society for Human Resource Management books, many of which have been ranked as #1 Amazon bestsellers in the categories of human resources management, labor employment law, business conflict resolution mediation, business mentoring and coaching, communication and management, business and organizational learning, and business decision-making and problem-solving. His books have been translated into Chinese, Hindi, Korean, Vietnamese, Indonesian, and Turkish. Our guest is a certified executive coach through the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder-Centered Coaching Program, a long-term columnist for SHRM and HR Magazine, and an adjunct faculty member in UCLA's Extension School of Business and Management. He is an accomplished keynote presenter, in-house trainer, and webinar facilitator in the areas of talent and performance management, leadership development, and effective leadership communication. Please help me welcome Mr. Paul Falcone. How are you, sir?
Wow, what an intro. I don't know where you got all that information, Ralph, but I'm really impressed. I can't wait to hear what this guy's going to say. So we're going to have a good time.
I'm looking at that guy and I can't wait either. Well, I like how you start the interview off today, because you seem like a fun individual, and I'm very proud and honored to call you my friend. And I only imagined that Nickelodeon was a fun place to work, right? So tell us a little bit about your experience working at Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon Animation was a dream. I would have stayed there forever, but layoffs and whatnot happened. The entertainment industry's had challenges, but it was such a fun place. And the funny thing, Ralph, is the kids who doodle in the back of the room, but they're really, really talented, who end up going to Cal Arts and these other schools, were basically all the animators. And it's an interesting group. It really is. You got to kind of pull them out a little bit because they're kind of more introverted and they do like doodling, but they doodle so incredibly well. It turns into SpongeBob. I don't know how it works, but the magic happens. It was a fun gig. It was a really, really fun job.
That's amazing. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm kind of a nerd. So here's a nerd in me. When it comes to Nickelodeon, I'm going to share a little fun fact. Is that okay?
Please, please.
So Nickelodeon is comprised of two Greek words, Nick or nickel, which means a course of admission, and Odeon means theater. Is that about right?
I had no idea. That has missed awareness on me to this day, but now I'm always going to think Greek when I think Nickelodeon. I love it. I think it's perfect.
Oh, man, it's too much. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I know that I mentioned that you have leadership books out there. I didn't go over the titles. I'll talk about 2 titles, and I'll tell you why. You just have too many books. You have way too many.
I have to apologize for that. I'm going to keep writing until I get it right.
Oh, my God. Look, I'm going to say this now because I don't want to forget. Listeners and viewers, after listening and seeing this episode, whether it's on YouTube or any of the podcasts out there, go over to Amazon.com, type in Paul Falcone, type in his name, and you'll see all the books that will come up. You can literally start your own leadership and management library. Trust me. Go there. It's the stuff.
Again, I can't get better publicity than this, so you're good. Come on, Ralph. Keep going.
Thank you so much. All right. So I know I talked a little bit about your background. So tell us in your own words, who is Paul Falcone?
A teacher. I've always had a parallel career. So I did like 3 decades of HR, right? Healthcare, biotech, entertainment. But at the same time, I was writing books. And my 17th book just came out 2 months ago. But I've also been I was a columnist for SHRM. I've always been writing. I've been teaching at UCLA, the School of Business and Management. To me, there's so much there. And people say, where do you come up with all the content for your books? And I tell them, believe me, I'm not that creative. It just finds you when you're in human resources.
I like that.
And what I've been able to do is kind of storytell and turn it into learning lessons that I think relate to people, because even if you have an MBA from a top 10 business school, it's like they don't teach you leadership in the trenches. They teach you the theory, organizational design, behavior, development. But where's the leadership piece? So that you have to kind of figure out on your own. And the problem is when experience is your only teacher, you're going to step on landmines all along the way as you're quote unquote learning. So my job has always been to kind of shortcut that system and help people become better communicators, leaders, and team builders. As long as that's one focus of all my books, it's worked well. I've been really fortunate. I've been really lucky.
Your books are excellent. And actually, here's one of the things, too, I want you to understand. One of your books I actually purchased, I think, in 2010, 2011. And I had your book in my office when I was working for the government, and it was on my bookshelf. One of my supervisors came in, looked at the book, and thought that that would be a great resource for her to have. So much that other supervisors purchased the book as well. And it's entitled 2,600 Phrases for Effective Performance Reviews, Ready to Use Words and Phrases That Really Get Results. That book is phenomenal. The other thing about this book that I find interesting is that it's not just a phrase book. It's actually a leadership book. It's a thick leadership book, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. The book has sold very, very well. I think on the cover it says over 200,000 copies sold, and that was a number of years ago. So it's continuing to go, and knock on wood, it's my biggest seller in terms of volume. But you're right. When I wrote that book, it wasn't just to give phrases. It was to build a context around how you use those phrases and how you use them to open up conversations. The conversations could be verbal or they could be documented. I mean, this book was really about documenting, right? It was about doing performance reviews for people, but capturing how to say things that were not always that easy to say. And to me, it was almost like, if you're doing this the right way and you're opening the conversation, you're not only giving fair feedback and direct feedback, but you're also opening a can of worms where you can talk about the conversational piece. How do we move from X to Y? How do we build a plan around this? How do you build muscle in that particular space? And in that way, it's not really, people don't feel like they've been judged. They don't feel like they're being, like the teacher is yelling at them in front of the second grade classroom. they're really seeing it from a career and professional development standpoint. And people will then want to turn it around on their own because they want to, not because they have to. And that's really the key to good leadership communication, my humble opinion.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. And we're talking about communication leadership today. So that's very befitting. Another book you came up with, and I'll leave it at that, is 101 Tough Conversations to Have with Employees, a manager's guide to addressing performance, conduct, and discipline challenges. And that's essentially what we're going to talk about today, leadership and communication, because a lot of people have to understand that leaders are great communicators. And when I say great communicators, there are different levels of communication. You don't have to be like a keynote speaker like yourself or just a great orator. When we say great communicator, what I'm looking at is the 3 C's of communication. In law enforcement, because I worked in law enforcement over 28 years, and I was also a trainer. One of the things I used to talk to people about is the 3 C's of communication: clear, concise, and complete. So long as your communication is clear, it's concise and complete, I think that is robust enough for leaders to understand how to move with their communication. So talk to us a little bit about communication and leadership, the importance of the two.
They really go hand in hand. I mean, leadership is going to be at the top of the mountain, right? What's your brand as a leader? But really right below that is communication. It's really kind of the key when it comes to the leadership brand that I have, my ability to team build, make it safe for my employees to do their best work every day with peace of mind, my ability to collaborate, particularly across departments where companies oftentimes fall apart. They're good like in their silo, but they kind of get that feeling that no one is listening to one another across the enterprise. That's really where this comes from. And when you look, interesting, Ralph, when you look at Gen Y millennials and the Gen Z Zoomers, which is like the 45 crowd and under, and the 25 crowd and under, the Gen Y and the Gen Z, they're the most studied, cohorts in world history. We know everything about these generations because there's been so much out there from the universities and the think tanks and everyone else. But in study after study, they keep coming back within their top 3 or their top 5 priorities. They want career and professional development. I said, what does that mean? It doesn't mean looking the other way and sweeping it under the rug. These people want to learn their craft. They want to learn their trade. They want to master their job. So you got to know how to give real-time feedback, even if it is, I don't want to say negative, but even is potentially confrontational where there'll be disagreements. It's not what you say, it's how you say it that counts. And that's what that book was all about. The other part of it, Ralph, is you also have to know how to recognize people. The importance of recognition is so incredible out there. It's a psychic income that keeps people coming back to work because they love working for their boss. And how many times managers tell themselves silly narratives like, to be effective as a manager, you must be feared. Or I'm never going to give my employees recognition because it's going to go to their head. They're going to want more money. Those things that we tell ourselves are baloney. That's not real. That's not true. I worked once for someone who scared the life out of me. I couldn't chew gum and walk at the same time. I was so afraid of making a mistake. That's not a leadership brand. That's a mistake. That's someone who shouldn't be in management, right? But I also know that when you call out people, either not just for showing up, but for extraordinary achievement or for extraordinary effort, man, they thrive. They love it. It's give it freely. This is a gift to give away. Too many managers have taught themselves not to do that. But again, it's that combination of real-time constructive feedback plus recognition. Those are your 2 pillars, in my humble opinion, of really where great communicators stand and differentiate themselves.
Wow, that's excellent. So some ineffective communication can lead to communication breakdown. I think that's what you were alluding to as well. So what are some other examples of ineffective communication?
Oh, there's so many. I had written a book called Workplace Ethics. And in the book on ethics, I talk about, the monkey that covers its eyes and covers its ears and covers its mouth and just doesn't want to know. It's called deliberate ignorance. There's actually a term for that, or willful blindness theory. But the point is, as a manager, you can't look the other way. First of all, you're not doing your people any favors. Second of all, it's going to, build and build and build until some proverbial straw is broken on the camel's back and the whole thing blows up. And where I experienced that, Ralph, was as head of HR for these various companies. They'd come running into my office. They want somebody fired. And I'm like, okay, slow down. What happened? What's going on? But then I look at the record. And I've got a personnel file that has no progressive discipline, no negative documentation, only stellar performance reviews. And now they want me to fire them, which made me the bad guy. This is my client, right? The manager who's coming to me is my client. I'm supposed to help them get done what they need to get done. But if they're not doing their end of this, I can't salvage them. So all of a sudden, I'm the bad guy. I realized that early in my career. So what I started to do was management training at the companies where I've worked so that they understood what I'd be looking for, how I look at things, and just to kind of get that leadership perspective down. The training naturally happened for me in the workplace, in my human resources role. But obviously, about 2 years ago, I opened up my own consulting firm. It obviously lends to doing management training and keynote speaking and everything else. So that's what I'm specializing in these days.
Excellent. What I find is that a lot of people in management positions, they find that tough correlation between managing and leading. Did you find that to be true working at Nickelodeon?
Not necessarily at Nickelodeon, but overall over 3 decades in human resources. Yeah. A lot of people never make the mental transition, the mindset change to go from being an individual contributor to being a leader. What made them comfortable, what made them successful was having control over everything, right? When you're an individual contributor, you know what's going on your desk or at your workstation. Anyone can ask you any questions and you've got answers. All of a sudden, you got 3 or 4 people who report to you, or maybe 30 or 40. And this uber control mechanism kicks in. And that's when we talk about being a micromanager, right? I've seen managers who have said, all employees in my department, you are not to send an email out without me being copied on it. And I think, what are you doing? It's like, I understand you want to have the control, but you'll never be able to scale your career. Because if you've got 3, I'm not giving you 30, and I'm certainly not giving you 300 if you don't learn how to do this the right way.
Right.
But by the way, nobody wants to work for a micromanager. So you need to rethink this. So the question is, how do you do it? And just real quickly, what they want is control. They want a sense of knowing what's on the desk. That's what staff meetings are for. That's what one-on-one meetings are for. That's where you can sit around the campfire, right? Pass the wisdom down to the younger generation and say, you guys, this is what worked for me. And these are the expectations I've had for myself. Tell me how you're doing it. Tell me how you're finding success in it. And let's make sure we're on the same page so that we're all aligned and we're all consistent in terms of how we're approaching these things. You don't have to do them the same way, but you do need to be consistent in how you're doing them as a team. So that's where those conversations will let you sleep better at night, give up the uber control, and then feel better about scaling your career over the long term.
Excellent. Is that also in stark contrast to failing to communicate upward?
No, a little bit of a different animal. I would say the first part is about communicating downward, right? Managing a team. The communicating upward piece almost has, it's funny, it's a mirror in certain ways, but for a lot of employees, it's a lot tougher. It's one thing to hold your employees accountable. It's another thing to tell your manager you don't like the way she's managing you. And how do you do that in a way that's respectful to them and doesn't seem insubordinate, but get your message across? So again, we have conversations for all this stuff in that one book, but the theory would be, what kind of workplace situations are coming your way as a manager, and how do you help people want to change for themselves, whether they're above you, below you, or to the side of where you are right now in the organization.
Excellent. Another barrier to ineffective communication is poor listening skills. So talk to us a little bit about that.
The advice I've always given managers is, look, you guys, honestly, you need to listen with your eyes and your heart in addition to your ears. And that means listening to show that you care. Don't interrupt. Don't idea steal. Don't say you're being too sensitive, blah, 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 blah. People are where they're at. You have to meet them in their space, wherever it happens to be. We're evolving. All of our souls are evolving. Some of us are a little further up the food chain than others. So at the same time, though, when you study out these generational cohorts, the Gen Y, the Gen Z, what you keep hearing top 10 is they want to work for an ethical company, doing meaningful work, for a management team that cares about them personally. What does that mean? A boss that cares for me personally. Is that too much to ask? Is it too much to give? I don't think so. It worked well for me for 3 decades. The reality, though, is getting that feeling like my boss cares about me personally doesn't mean you're going to lunch at all. It doesn't mean it just means my boss listens. My boss makes the space for me to share my ideas, makes it safe for me to come up with new ideas, and this idea of innovation and creativity. When I have a problem, I can talk to my boss and he or she will listen and help me get to a realistic solution, but set my expectations so that they're not over the moon. That's all we're talking about. But the listening piece is really critical, because if you tend to cut people short or not listen, it shuts them down, and mentally you'll lose them really, really quickly.
Excellent. This also can be considered disrespectful as well, right?
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. And the way I look at leaders are human beings. Leaders have family members. How would you feel if someone disrespected your mother or your father, your grandmother, your grandfather? Treat people the way you want to ultimately be treated. And I firmly believe in that.
Yeah, I totally agree. The expression I've always used is what you want for yourself, give to another. It's that simple. And even doing executive coaching, which I do more of these days, Ralph, because I'm not in corporate anymore, so I'm free to do that stuff. One of the questions I ask when I begin the relationship is, be honest with me. Would you want to work for you? And it's interesting. They kind of give you the look of like, yeah, I see where you're going with this. Well, Paul, sometimes, but I'm really busy. And they kind of go into that mode of making excuses. I'm not judging anyone. It's okay. The idea of the executive coaching is to strengthen muscle, not to put it down, right? So, okay, you're aware of it. But a similar question, the corollary question, and this could be for that top sales producer who thinks no one could touch me because I'm the biggest sales producer in this branch. Yet they're toxic to everybody around them. The question is, if the whole company followed your lead in terms of your role model behavior and your conduct, if the whole company followed your lead, would you be happy with where you took it?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they look at me and they'll say, no, I get it. Probably not. I understand when I'm kind of in that zone, and it's probably not a good place for me to be. But they're making themselves vulnerable. And it's so funny. This importance of vulnerability, both from the leader and from the staff member, as long as you can make it that people can kind of open up their arms and not feel that sense of constant, defensiveness, you can get really to the person a lot more quickly. One of the top 10 TED Talks of all times is on the importance of vulnerability. Brene Brown, University of Texas at Austin, is the professor who did that. If you like TED Talks, listen to that one. The vulnerability TED Talk scores one of the top 10 in all these different surveys. It's worth 18 minutes of your time, but listen to it with your team. And then talk to everybody about, where do we fit on this scale? You got a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being we're perfect. Where are we? Oh, we're a 6 or we're a 7. Okay, why are we a 6 or a 7? That's the first part of the conversation. The second part of the conversation is, what would make us a 10? And there's your action plan. And then everyone can figure out, how are we going to do this together as a team to move forward? And it makes it a shared goal for everybody. It's cool stuff. It's not that hard to do. We just need to kind of tweak a little bit in terms of how people see themselves as leaders sometimes.
And you make learning about leadership and management cool, by the way.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Ralph, the funny thing is, it's all in the storytelling.
Right.
You give people rules that goes in one ear and out the other, and they roll their eyeballs. You tell them a story that can kind of pierce their heart and register with like what their experience has been. I've had people come up to me 20 years later. I still remember that story you told us about blah, blah, blah.
People remember stories.
They do.
That's the best way to communicate your vision, your mission, and to get people to understand what it is that you want them to do. Because for some reason, as human beings, we understand stories and we visualize stories and we can carry it out. We can see the future through stories. So yes, I agree with you. Totally. And thank you so much.
As long as you agree with me, and I know I'm doing good. I am on the right path. I need the affirmation. This is good.
Well, we're all about the affirmations. We got to do that sometimes. And you've provided excellent recommendations and suggestions to overcoming a lot of the communication hurdles and barriers. But here's another one that we need to talk about, and I think is very important. Let's talk about how culture ties into potential and effective communication.
Want to do a book together?
Yeah.
The importance of the culture in all of this. The culture is just the atmosphere, right? What's the personality of the organization? And oftentimes people look to the very top of the organization. And if you bring the bad news up, they're going to be the ones to lop off your head because, don't kill what's the expression? don't kill the message deliverer. Yeah, the messenger. I get that. But I'm also going to give a caveat here. As a manager in a company, whatever level you're at, whether you have a team of 1 or 2 people or you got a division of 400, you create your own ecosystem. I don't care what's going on above you, whether the rockets are flying and who's yelling and who's screaming, who's shooting fire, who's throwing chairs. I don't care. You have to protect your own people from that stuff and still make it that they can do their very best work every day with peace of mind. That's your responsibility to your people, and that's how you have to grow talent to understand that. There's never going to be a perfect world. Yeah, at Nickelodeon, it was the closest I got to being the best company I've ever worked for, primarily because at the animation studio, the general manager, Mark Taylor, was the greatest leader I'd ever seen. I mean, this man was phenomenal. Everyone trusted him. Everyone liked him. He knew people's names. I mean, he really cared about the people at that studio. That makes a big difference in the world. But even if you don't have that people factor, still, the culture is going to dictate what's safe and what's not. And what I say is, and I've never just, we all have differences in how we manage our careers. For me, Ralph, I was never afraid of getting fired. I don't live my life by fear of this stuff. My point is, my people are going to experience a certain culture in my department, on my team, regardless of what's going on. Even if I work for the best company on the planet, I'm still going to make sure that they feel the love. They've got to know that that I have their backs. And what Mark Taylor taught me at Nickelodeon, what he would do is, he was kind of, as a GM, people left Disney, they left Warner Brothers, they left DreamWorks. They all wanted to work at Nick because they wanted to work for Mark. Mark spent the first day with new hires, about 15 people on average, coming in every 2 weeks. And so it was a small studio, but the reality was it's a big name. And, he would talk to them about, tell me about yourself. I want to make sure I know your name. I want to know what brought you here to Nickelodeon. I want to hear about your expectations, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But then he would end it and talk about his big 8 rules, my great 8 rules. And he'd say, you guys, you're going to see this and you're going to hear about it. So I want you to hear it directly from me, because regardless of the policy and procedure manual and the employee handbook and the collective bargaining agreement and the code of conduct, if you follow these 8 rules, you're going to do fine here. And he would talk about them. And the first one was always bring out the best in others, right? This idea of having people's backs. That was point number 1. And then you'd go through whatever his points were. But the point is, people loved it. It's like you were coming to this organization. You were so excited on day 1 to be part of the Nickelodeon family. And you basically had the GM sitting there 2 feet from you who knew your name, talking to you about his values and why they should become your values, because you're each now a steward of this organization in making the culture what it is and perpetuating the culture that comes before you. Gave people, goose pimples on their backs, but everyone knew where they stood. Had very little drama at the animation studio because it all worked together so well.
Excellent. And you reminded me of a book I read some time ago in my undergrad studies. We were talking about communication, leadership communication, managerial communications, as well as communicating with other people and from different cultures. And the name of the book is Communicating with Strangers. One of the things that I remember from the book is mindfulness, being open to new information. The authors also go on to say, to be mindful, we must also recognize that there is more than one perspective that can be used to understand or explain our interaction with others. I interpret that to say, with those we do not know well, or with people from other cultures.
Yeah, I totally agree. The idea, what we hear a lot about is multiculturalism and then multiple generations in the workplace, right? For the first time in history, we've got 5 generations in the workplace. We've never had more than 3. Now, that's changing pretty quickly, where the oldest gen is now in their early 70s. But where I worked in my last full-time job, I was the CHRO of the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is a healthcare nonprofit, but primarily known for its retirement location. So we had independent and assisted living and skilled nursing and memory care and behavioral psychiatry and all this other stuff. But we had people well into their 70s, and we had people who were 18. And what do you do in bringing these people together? And what about multiculturalism? What does it look like? The reality is, for all the noise I'm afraid that we hear sometimes in the political realm, people are working really, really hard. No one does anything wrong given their model of the world. And these people are working really, really hard. But we have to share those stories. You've got to sit around the campfire. We've lost the ability to sit around the campfire as a society and pass the wisdom from the elders down to the younger generation. Profiling your own employees is a great way to do that. We had one example where the janitor who had been there for 42 years, his son was graduating from UCSD, University of California in San Diego, with a degree in microbiology and beginning his master's degree. I mean, that's the beauty of it. This man worked so hard as a janitor for all those years, not making a lot of money, obviously, but look at the values he passed on to his children. And now look at this child and what this child is about to do. So many of those stories come out, but we have to talk about it in profiling your employees and talking a little bit about their families. Doesn't all have to be work. That creates a culture of trust. And it creates a culture of values where people really see that this organization looks beyond what can the organization do for me? Looks beyond what can I do for the organization to also what can the organization do for me? And that becomes a really big differentiator in terms of the culture that you ultimately develop and create.
Right. And that's very important. Trust is extremely important. And you also talked about what leaders fail to understand is their brand. Everyone has a brand. And I meant to bring this up earlier when you said it. When we think of branding, we think of marketing, but people in leadership positions fail to recognize that they are a brand. Their brand is how they communicate verbally, non-verbally, how they dress, how they interact, if they're authentic. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Good. So here's a scoop. Here's an example from the 101 Tough Conversations, right? You've got a sales producer who's a top producer, but the person is fairly toxic to work with. Nobody wants to work with that person, feeling of like they eat their young, avoid this guy. You can open up with, Paul, you always do this. You never do that, but blah, blah, blah. It sounds very judgmental. They're going to shut down. They become very defensive. So that's not a way to open a conversation, right? With generalities that use words like always and never. Here's how you switch it, Ralph. You talk to someone and say, they say the most important decisions about your career are going to be made when you're not in the room. That's the same for you as it is for me, as it is for everybody else. And I think that there's something that may be missing awareness that could hold you back over the long term when you're not in that proverbial room at some point in the future to defend yourself. Do I have your permission? Can I share with you what it looks like from my vantage point? Sure. What's going on, Paul? And now you can talk about, listen, I want to start with your leadership brand. And do they say your name followed by the word and? Or do they say your name followed by the word but? Is it, I know Paul Falcone, he's been a top producer at this firm for the 3 years that he's been here, and you want to seek out his guidance. He will help you be successful. He's a wonderful resource. Get to know him right away on your first day. Or are they saying, yeah, Paul Falcone's been here for 3 years. He's a top performer, but you might want to be careful. Most of us kind of cut a white swath around him. You never know what kind of mood he's going to be in. And truthfully, he's not particularly helpful to anyone else. He's kind of more of a selfish producer. So would probably recommend not getting too close to that when he bites. Which one do you want to be? I'm not judging. You're an adult. You make the decision. But what I'm telling you is going to help you over your career in the long term, especially as you want to grow into sales management and divisional management, hopefully become a chief sales officer at some time, is leadership through people, not leadership despite them. And to the degree that you're willing to make yourself that gift and pay it forward and build strong salespeople around you, your career is going to take off. But to the degree that you're selfish about your sales and you're not sharing that wisdom with anyone else, you can only go so far in your career. And you can't blame other people for that because they're not seeing you as a people leader and people developer. What are your thoughts? Now you've had a conversation with someone, Ralph, where you've constructed it in their own best interests to kind of grab a hold of this olive branch that you're extending. And I'm telling it, look, I'll make it safe for you here. I'll have your back. We can fix this together so that never holds you back throughout the rest of your career. But whether you want me to be your coach and your mentor through this or not, my expectations remain the same. I expect you to exhibit role model leadership, to help build stronger leaders and stronger salespeople all around you. And right now, truthfully, your performance may be stellar, but in terms of what I call your conduct or your behavior, you're not quite meeting expectations. And I need someone who can meet the full round of responsibilities, not just the half. Performance is half. Your conduct is the other half. I need you to be as strong with your conduct as you are with your performance. Your career will go nowhere but up. That's a fair conversation to have with somebody. I'm not judging them. I'm not making them feel embarrassed. I'm not trying to make them feel bad, but I can give them my observation without giving them any judgment. And I can offer to be that solution to help them get to that next stage in their career.
Excellent. Two things come to my mind. Listen to what you just said. One, you may be a great practitioner, but can you teach? Number two, just because you're a great asset to the organization in terms of being an employee, as you should, everyone should strive to be excellent at what they do. However, that doesn't necessarily make you a leader. So a lot of people, and the reason I say that is because I've worked with so many people and I've done coaching for organizations, and even the individuals who brought me into coach, they could not understand if they worked for a company 10, 15, 20 years, or even 5 years, how is it that they were not promoted? And then I would have to assess, just because you're a great employee, you're supposed to be a great employee, doesn't necessarily make you the best candidate for a leadership role or position, because you need something extra. And maybe you don't have, and like you said, you hit the nail on the head in terms of mentoring and coaching. Have you done any leadership development? Have you taken your leadership to another level to understand what leadership truly is about, the difference between leadership and management, and how your personality, if you will, conjoined with leading others, and how others would actually want to be led by you if you're a good fit for that, and if the organization actually creates a program in which you can benefit from in terms of being a leader. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, excellent questions. The first thing I would say is not everyone is meant to teach. You can be a great individual contributor, and that's good. That's okay. You don't need to do more than that because you're already where you are as an individual contributor. And I don't want to get into management. I don't really want to train people. That's fine. That's not what I'm saying. No, I'm still saying you still have to be a positive influence on those around you. But it's okay if you don't want to teach. Okay, the second thing I would say, though, is we make this a lot harder than we need to. When I'm teaching at UCLA, when I talk to the classes about, and I do this exercise every quarter, it's like, you guys tell me about the best boss you've ever had, your favorite boss ever. Don't tell me who it was or what company. Just tell me what made that person so. Up go the hands. She was someone who brought out the best in me. She seemed to have more faith in me than I had in myself at the time. Okay, next student. I really felt challenged by her. She really pushed me to do things. And because of her, I went back and got my bachelor's degree. I'll always be thankful to her for that. Fine. Third student, always found levity, know how crazy it was, taught us well, but made sure that we were in a good position. I love working for him. The question then becomes to the class, are you describing the person's beingness or their doingness? It's both the beingness, who they are, as well as the doingness, what they did. But what's the primary driver? And usually where the students go is they start raising their hands and they say, it's the doingness. It was what she did that made me feel so good. Okay, keep talking, and then keep going. And all of a sudden, someone in the classroom says, wait a second. I think it's their beingness. I think it's who they were that triggered what they did. And so in essence, the beingness really made them the best leader. To me, that's the right answer. This is the better answer, because the truth of the matter is great leadership is about two things. It's about character and it's about caring. That's it. The character, the trust, the respect, the culture that you build in your ecosystem. That's the character of the person you work for. The fact that that person cared about me personally tells me that management is a heart issue. It's an emotional attachment that you have to someone. They can call me up and offer me 20% to go elsewhere. But if I love working for Paul Falcone, I ain't leaving, because I can go somewhere else and start working for somebody who throws chairs and spits fire. I don't know what I'm going to get. This guy is always about my career and professional development. I have fun on my job. We celebrate our accomplishments and our achievements as a team. I don't want to leave. To me, I've had very little turnover on my teams, Ralph, over the years. So I've been really fortunate about that. But I still think the reality is stop focusing on doing. As a society, we are chasing our tails with our hair on fire. Do. The reality is great leadership is about inspiration. Okay, you manage things, you lead people. There's your difference. The question is, how do you lead them? Do you lead them by fear and intimidation? Or do you lead them by creating the space where they can motivate themselves, where they can find ways of getting traction so that they can figure out their own way under your watchful eye? You're the guide, you're the coach, but they could find a way to find their own level of success That works for parenting as well as it works for managing and leading in the workplace. It's the same kind of idea. We need to take a little bit of a collective breath and stop chasing our tails with our hair on fire and just look at, if I want to be someone's best boss, the greatest boss they've ever had, the most inspirational leader, what do I have to do to create that space, to make room for them to find their way? And there's no rocket science. There's no magic answer. You need to sit with them and talk, both individually and as a team. But it's okay. I would tell people, you guys look, and I don't say this in a fluffy way, I'd like to be someone who, I don't want to say is your favorite boss, but someone who really had a positive impact on all of your careers, at least at this point. So you can always rely on me. I'm always here to talk about things. I'll help you build up your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your self-review for your annual review. You focus on the achievements, increasing revenue, decreasing expenses, saving time, increasing customer satisfaction. I'll work with you on codifying it, quantifying it, turning it into a bullet on your resume, attached to dollars or percentages or whatever. But let's focus on achievements and let's make sure that you guys are doing your best work every day with peace of mind. That's my goal. It's that simple. And you can see that they're like, okay, I kind of like this guy. If he's real, if what he's saying is true, I can get into this. Now it's going to be a matter of time to make sure that my walk and my talk are consistent. But as soon as I see that's the case, their values are now my values. I also share my top 10 things, like Mark Taylor did at Nickelodeon. He had a big 8. I have a big 10. But we can share those things. And then I can ask them, tell me what yours are in the next meeting. Tell me what your top 3 or top 5 values are. Maybe we'll create something for the whole team as an amalgam where we put this all together. It doesn't take time. It's just refocusing your energy to focus on this as opposed to some of the other stuff that goes on out there that you really probably can cut. Focus on these high payoff activities. It makes a tremendous difference in your leadership career and your brand.
Excellent. Beingness, I love that. And walk the walk, talk the talk. I love that also. And we can talk about that for hours on end.
Hours. Yep. It's good
Now,
stuff.
It is phenomenal. And we're wrapping up, but before we go, let me ask you one last question. Are leaders responsible for employees' actions, and should leaders be held liable for the actions of employees? The reason I ask that is because the United States Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, right now, based on the Donald Trump assassination attempt, she's undergoing congressional hearings. I'm not getting into the politics of that. I'm just talking about the communication breakdown. So are leaders ultimately responsible for the actions of their employees, especially in terms of communication?
It's a great question. It's a yes and a no. It's not an either and. It's not an either or. It's a both and. Let me answer it this way. From a practical standpoint, of course, you're not responsible. They're adults. Adults are adults. You can influence them. You can terminate them. You can promote them. You can do things to them. But adults are going to do what adults are going to do. So to that degree, I would say, no, we're not responsible for the acts of our employees. On the flip side, of course, you're responsible for the acts of your employees. They're under your purview. So if they do something really kind of stupid, people are going to look to the manager and say, well, what kind of leadership was going on there if that person thought they can do X, Y, or Z? In your case, you're talking about Secret Service and an attempted assassination. You know that not just the immediate manager, but all the way up to the top of the Secret Service is going to be under scrutiny for something like that. So that's why I say, depending on the circumstances, you have to cut yourself some slack. It's hard to be a manager because you're responsible always for being an individual contributor plus the feeding and care of your employees, right? It's not one or the other. It's both. You're always going to be an individual contributor plus you're a leader. So that leadership add-on, sometimes people feel like it's too much. I can only take care of me. I can't worry about them too. I understand that unless we can give them the tools and the techniques to make it easier on themselves, to make it easier for their employees to do their best work. Okay, so there's that. On the flip side, though, I understand why people are micromanagers. When they worked an individual contributor desk or workstation, they had all the answers. They knew anyone could walk up and they can answer everything. Now, all of a sudden, I got 2 people or 4 people on my team. I can't answer all the questions for them like I was able to answer. So now they get uber controlling and they want to make sure they know everybody's every step of every way. That's not the answer either. You've got to make the space to talk about what your expectations are, what your experiences have been, what's working for your team, where the lines are, where you shouldn't be doing things, when you need to escalate issues. But then you could sleep at night without being a micromanager. No one wants the micromanagement piece. It's not healthy for you. You can't scale your career. You're going to give yourself a heart attack at an early age, and your employees are going to hate it. It's just a bad combination. So,
yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. I appreciate your response, your honest response. And I think that's why pulse checks are important also. I think it mitigates you from being a micromanager, but just being a leader of concern, where you're actually just checking in on those leaders who are in those various departments and just talking about various issues and talking about certain systemic issues and coming up with solutions for them. I think pulse checks are very important as well in that same vein.
I totally agree, Ralph. And my final thought for me is we've lost the ability as a society to sit around the campfire and pass wisdom down from the elder generation to the younger generation. That's what your staff meetings are for. That's what your one-on-one meetings are for. Is we've got to have that human connection, especially when you have a distributed workforce now where people are working remotely. You don't see them every day in the break room. That takes more intentional leadership, right? It has to be more deliberate in terms of building these relationships. But it's more important than ever. Because the reality is people are going to do their best work when they feel like they're recognized, when they feel like their boss cares about them personally, and they feel like their boss has their back. Take away those elements and you're going to have people that are doing their jobs just to get through the day and can't wait till 5 o'clock. And that's never where you're going to get the best performers. So.
Excellent. Wow. We can talk for another few hours. And I say that because I love talking about this. You're very knowledgeable on this subject as well. And I'm having such a great time talking with you. I think you need to come back for maybe 2-3 more installments.
You know where to find me. So yeah, you tell me anytime. I'd be happy to. It'd be my pleasure.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you, Paul, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today about causal issues relative to communication breakdown between leaders and followers and how to correct the communication deficit between them. Thank you so much. It has been my pleasure and honor talking with you today, and I thank you. But before we go, don't forget to purchase Paul's books on Amazon.
Ooh, good plug. I love it, Ralph. It's good. And anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn too, feel free to send. I'm just Paul Falcone 1 on LinkedIn, so we can connect that way too if you'd like to.
Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. And for more information about this podcast, books, workshops, and training programs, be sure to visit my website. Can I give myself a plug? Is that okay?
Please.
Be sure to visit my website at www.drhspeaks.com. That's drhspeaks with an s.com. I also want to take this opportunity to thank you, the listeners and viewers, for your support in making this podcast possible. It is always a pleasure having you as part of the family. Until the next time, be well, God bless, and lead on.